Hello everyone, ThunderEgg here. So in today's video, I'm basically going to be going over the only YELAN guide you'll ever need. So in this video, I'll be covering mostly for C0 YELAN. It also applies from C1 to C5, but there's a bit more modification to do with C6. But I don't think I need to cover that because I assume most of you that are watching this video does have a YELAN that is not C6. So for this video, I'll be covering her playstyle, what each part of her kit plays in her role in terms of her playstyle. So her E, her Q, her special breakthrough effects, things like that. Moving on to her weapon choices or artifact choices, and also her artifacts, main stats or substats to focus on. And I'll leave it off with a few team recommendations for her. So with that said, let's get started. So I think everyone here that are watching this video can agree with me that YELAN is basically a S tier character. Worst comes to worst, the A tier character. She is very strong and definitely one of the strongest character that has been released in Genshin so far. YELAN's playstyle is an off-field DPS, which means she does most of her damage through her Q while she's not even on the field. C6 can play as a not main DPS, but a burst DPS while she was having her special breakthrough state. But again, today's video is mostly going to be focusing on C0 or C1 YELAN. As one of the newer experimental characters, YELAN scales mainly off max HP, except her normal attack, which we will pretty much not cover in this video. And with that, a common misconception when building her is people still focus on crit rate and crit damage as the primary stats to focus on. That is the correct stats to focus on for a sub DPS like Xingqiu who scales off attack. But for YELAN, because her HP scaling is very well compared to other characters, so in some sense her HP scaling is more beneficial than crit rate and crit damage scaling for her compared to some of the characters that scales off attack. So a common misconception is people still try to stack large amounts of crit damage on her, which for her is actually more profitable to just stack HP in that case. So I'm gonna start with basically the same order that goes through most stuff as well. So we're starting with her basic stats, but if you want to see her artifacts and other sections, please just use the timestamp in the description down below. So starting with her normal plunge and charge attack, there is basically nothing to it. She is another character that has amazing normal attack animation, but you will never get to see it because you will never need to use it in game. I'm basically up to the point where nowadays I'm playing her as my main DPS, even though she doesn't have damage on her normal attack, just so I can see the attack animation because, you know, I paid for a 5-star character. I want to play. I want to see every part of her animation. So nowadays with open world activities, fighting like world bosses, doing domains, doing ley lines, I'm using her as a main DPS. But the most important thing for her normal plunge charge attack is the breakthrough effect with her charge attack. Breakthrough can be obtained in two ways. The first way is after the entire team, not just YELAN, the entire team leaves battle for 5 seconds. So that includes not being chased by enemies and things like that. You'll always go into the battle with a breakthrough effect active pretty much all the time unless you exit one and enter it really fast within 5 seconds. The second way YELAN gets it is after using her E. So for every enemy the E is able to hit, there's a 34% chance of getting breakthrough. I made a mistake in my initial video earlier. Sorry, not earlier, about like a week or two ago, where I said these do not stack, however these do stack. So after you hit a maximum of 3 enemies or more, she is guaranteed to get a breakthrough effect. Whether YELAN has a breakthrough effect can be identified by the bracelet on YELAN's right hand. If the bracelet is glowing, breakthrough is ready. Breakthrough, the main thing about breakthrough and why you want to use it, the main thing about breakthrough is that breakthrough scales off max HP like the rest of her E and her Q scaling. And also the breakthrough has a decent AoE, it's just slightly smaller than Child's bow stance Q range. So it is very nice if you want to play Vaporize, like if you want to play a budget Child with Vaporize with her breakthrough, it's actually doable, people have tried it. However, breakthrough, the charging time is greatly reduced. It's like 80%, it's 20% of the original charging time. So I still do not recommend mobile players to try to work the breakthrough into her cycling unless you're very comfortable with aiming with mobile. But for PC and PS players, the only advice I can give is make sure you're aiming at the correct target before you enter the charge attack state. Otherwise, once you enter the charge attack state, the camera movement will slow down drastically. So if you do it that way, a lot of time you end up taking the amount of time you need to charge up a normal charge shot, which in turn you wasted the 20% charge time effect that comes with breakthrough. So what I would recommend is aiming first. Once you're ready, breakthrough, and it's pretty much ready instantly, and as you're ready, you just release arrow. So why use breakthrough? There are two main reasons you want to use breakthrough. The first one is hydro application. Breakthrough is very good, like Child's Ease boast, experienced child players can tell you. You always want to open up with bow stance Q to apply hydro onto enemies, and then once you're cycling through, you want to follow up with the melee stance Q to do maximum damage. The same thing with YELAN. You want to start with a breakthrough to apply hydro to most enemies, and this is also one of her advantages over Xingqiu. And the second part of why she wants to use breakthrough is energy particle generation. So like I've said, compared to Xingqiu, who can only apply hydro on a few enemies while using his E before going to Q, YELAN can apply hydro to almost all enemies as long as there's not too many number of enemies. She can basically do that with a combo between her E and her breakthrough, so that's ensuring that if you're playing with a Pyro main DPS team, you can always guarantee vaporize on the first hit, which is quite huge. And on top, you can make sure you set up a correct cycle between Pyro and hydro application, so you're vaporizing as much as possible. As for the particle generation part, if your camera is lined up already, the breakthrough is actually quite nice, because once you follow up with your E, you exit your E state, you have to take a bed to aim, and then you open the breakthrough state. By that point, you should already be getting the particles from your E, and after you basically exit the breakthrough state, you can go into cast Q, which point the particle of your breakthrough state can be absorbed by YELAN. So it really helps, especially with C0 YELAN with her energy generation problems, so it's a nice thing to use. But again, don't stress over it. If you're not comfortable with charge shot, if you cannot work it into your cycle, do not stress over it. Breakthrough also has a small knockback effect. It only works on the smallest size of enemies. Anyone bigger will generally not work. It's also kind of backwards. For breakthrough, the knockback is causing enemies to knock backwards, whereas the E is actually causing enemy to be knocked towards YELAN, because she's actually pulling the threads closer to her. Moving on to her E. YELAN's E has basically two modes, tap or hold. Tap dashes forward a little bit. The distance is about the same as Ganyu's dash backwards, but direction is opposite. Hold is up to 3 seconds. She can basically move up fast speed for 3 seconds. During her E stage, she basically has the exact same characteristics as a Mona or Ayaka's dash, so she can get stuck on certain terrains, but she can skip large enemies' hitboxes, and the only difference is she also regenerates stamina while she's in her E state, while the other two doesn't. This state can be changed between 3 seconds. This state can basically get cancelled early if you auto attack or jump or tap E again. However, charge attack and Q will not cancel this state. As for how high the enemies are, and you can still hit it, any enemies that is basically lower than the Heliotrope guard towers, you can guarantee that your E can lash onto them. As for the E versus shield problem, since YELAN is actually pulling the threads closer to her near the end of the E, so any enemies that is facing away from you with their shields facing away from you can actually block the damage from that E hit, but enemy that's facing towards you will not be able to block it. It's kind of counterintuitive, but since you're pulling their behind towards you, so it sort of makes sense that way. Moving on to her Q. Her Q is basically the same condition as Xingqiu for how it can be triggered. So the coordinated attack will occur as long as you are left pressing your mouse key. So basically, as long as you're auto attacking, it doesn't matter if you're hitting enemies or not, and it doesn't matter if there's a shield active or not, it will basically trigger. Coordinated attack can occur max once per second, and each attack is actually 3 hydro arrows worth of damage going down. However, due to the rule of elemental application, which is either once every 2.5 seconds or once every 3 hits, takes the lower time of the two. So basically, it applies here that once every 3 hits. So basically, the first arrow of every single 3 arrow can apply hydro. Speaking of hydro application, here is all of YELAN's hydro application strength level. Breakthrough, E and Q Q's coordinated attack are all weak hydro application. The only strong hydro application she has is the initial damage of her Q. If you're wondering what I'm talking about in terms of application strength, I have a very old video on that. I will maybe link it down in the description below. You can check it out. It basically ensures the difference between hydro application, not hydro application, but the difference between elemental applications basically tells you how many times the elements can react and cause that reaction before the element is overwritten and is lost on the character. Compared to Xingqiu's C6, swords go 2 swords, 3 swords, and 5 swords for each coordinated attack, whereas Xingqiu actually applies hydro 4 times per cycle of 2, 3, 5, which is 10 hydro swords in total. Because every third hydro sword applies, so Xingqiu can actually apply hydro on the first, 4th, 7th, and 10th sword, whereas YELAN can only apply on the first, third, and first, 4th, and 9th sword. So YELAN will apply hydro 1 less time than Xingqiu per cycle. Plus Xingqiu's water swords close range can actually apply the water swords on the active character can actually apply hydro as well. So for characters like Hu Tao, especially C1 Hu Tao that wants to auto attack, that wants to charge attack all the time, Xingqiu is still a better option for hydro application. But YELAN's damage is harder than Xingqiu, and of course, if Hu Tao is C0 or any other character that sort of wants a bigger range than Hu Tao, in terms of they don't want to go as close as Hu Tao, then YELAN is still on par with Xingqiu in terms of damage, and even the better option because most of the time you don't need the damage reduction, you're looking for more damage, which YELAN can provide. The second way to trigger coordinated attack is of course while your Q is active, if your E pops, you can trigger coordinated attack, but I highly do not recommend that because this way the coordinated attack will only trigger on the last enemy that you have bound together with your spread. But because you're casting E, you're already wasting at least 3 hydro arrows worth of coordinated attack, which you could be attacking with normal attack, so you're actually losing DPS this way. So plus E, then Q is a better way to absorb particles for her to cycle, because while she uses her Q, her E's particle is getting funneled into her next Q. So this is why I do not recommend using the second way to trigger coordinated attacks. As for the damage buff state for her Q, it starts at 1%, goes up 3.5% every second, which means it reaches exactly 50% at the last second of her 15 seconds duration. The only advice I want to give here is if you're saying using someone that has like a burst DPS potential, do make sure to swap in that person last so that person can get the most amount of damage. So for example, in a team where Raiden national team, so Raiden, Bennett, Shanling, and YELAN. In this case, what you want to do is open with YELAN's E into Q, and then follow up with Bennett's E into Q, and then because Bennett doesn't do much damage there, and then follow up into Shanling's E into Q, because Shanling can snapshot Bennett's damage, and of course at this point you're already at pretty much the highest damage buff you can get. Then you swap Raiden to do her Q, and Raiden's Q can get a damage buff from both YELAN's passive and also on top Bennett's Q. So in teams like that, you just have to swap your rotation a little bit to make sure that your main DPS or your burst DPS is always going on the field last, so they get the highest damage boost. Moving on to weapons. As YELAN is someone who scales off HP, there's actually a lot of options. I don't know if you guys remember, but when Hu Tao was first released, a lot of people were saying the 3-star polearm that scales off HP was actually usable on her. It in fact is, and it's one of her not her best weapons, it's definitely one of her best free-to-play weapons. So for free-to-play players, I highly recommend do not pull her on her weapon. There are options there that can work on par with her weapon in terms of damage. And because her weapon actually gives damage buff, where YELAN actually really lacks ER at C0, anyone that ends up pulling for her weapon is really incentivized to pull for her C1, because C1 is the part that covers up her energy recharge problem. And I mean, this is something MiHoYo has set up well in advance, knowing that this is a good way for them to attract more sales. So for 5-star weapons, of course her weapon is the best option. It gives her a good damage boost in terms of boosting both HP and crit damage. And as for the range of the passive for her weapon, it's around the same range as Zhongli's shield shredding range. So basically the same range Zhongli has for shredding the resistance of enemies nearby. It's about It's slightly smaller than the range of her breakthrough effect. So second in slot for 5-star, and the only other 5-star I would recommend is Allergy for the End. The ER gives her the energy recharge she needed to consistently cycle, and it also gives her some support capability for the rest of her teams. 4-star options, there are quite a few. Best ones in slot is 100% Favonius Warbow at high refinements. If you do not have Favonius Warbow at high refinements, Sacrificial Bow can also work. The reason Favonius Warbow is better than Sacrificial Bow is because their energy recharge is around the same. But for the passive, for Favonius Warbow, you can just trigger right away, you don't have to do anything special. As for Sacrificial Bow, you do have to cast an extra E, and that extra cast of E is loss of damage. So if those of two are about the same refinement, I would recommend Favonius Warbow over Sacrificial Bow definitely. Personally, I do not recommend the other options, but if you're looking for damage for YELAN, the Inazuma's weapon, the Moon's Moon, I think, sorry I'm pronouncing that wrong for sure, and Stringless is good options for her. And if you really don't have other options, Alley Hunter and the new event bow also works on her. The main problem with the new event bow is the passive sort of weird, and the secondary stats ER is kind of low for her. But basically any 4-star weapon works on her, and also if you're using a 4-star weapon that has an attack percent as second passive, you don't even have to level up the weapon because she doesn't scale off attack, so you don't really need attack on her. But again, I think everyone has at least one Favonius Warbow from completing the development quest, so I would highly recommend using that on her. For 3 stars, there's actually 2 options still. If you want the crit rate, Slingshot can actually give you a nice 40% crit rate. As if you want an HP weapon, so higher damage, then Recurve Bow is actually the best shot, the 40%, I forgot the exact number, the 40-ish% HP really gives her a huge boost in terms of damage. Moving on to artifacts. Before I want to do anything with artifacts, I just want to again emphasize one thing. For YELAN, HP is actually better than crit damage for her, because even though she is a sub DPS, but because she scales mainly off max HP, the priority for her, whereas the normal priority for a normal sub DPS is crit damage, crit rate, attack, energy recharge, and other substats. For YELAN, HP is actually the most important, so it's HP, then crit rate, then crit damage, then energy recharge, and whatever stats she still has. So exactly how much crit damage to keep it, I would still recommend building the standard 1:2 ratio between crit rate and crit damage. But any crit damage over 200% is overkill, even over 175% or even like 160% can be overkill depending on how your build goes. But the golden rule is 175 is pretty much what you want to aim for max crit damage. You don't want to exceed that. So anything higher than that, if you can convert that to HP, you actually will receive higher damage in the end. Moving on to artifact pieces, artifact sets. There are essentially 5 options for build her. The first option is 4-piece Emblem of Sever Fate. The second option is 4-piece Noblesse Oblige. The third to fifth option is any of the 2-piece combo between Tenacity of the Limitless, Heart of Depths, and Noblesse Oblige. The difference between any of the 2-piece adding together is around the same, so for that one it really depends on your quality of artifact substats. As for option 1 is where she can dish out the most amount of damage, but she has no team support capability. And for option 2 is 4-piece Noblesse Oblige. She can actually dish out less damage, but does have more team support capability. So depending on who's on your team with YELAN, any of the 2 can work. For artifacts piece main stats, it's actually kind of tricky for YELAN. If you're using any bow other than Recurve Bow, so the one that gives the 40% HP boost, you want to focus on, if you're not using Recursive Bow and if you want to focus on damage, then you want to go the standard build, so HP Sands, Hydro Goblet, and Crit Circlet. But if you want to focus on sustainability, you actually want to go Energy Recharge Sands, no problem here. Hydro Goblet, no problem here. But instead of Crit Circlet, you want to go HP Circlet to cover up the HP. Because again, HP gives more damage than crit at certain stats. And if you have Recurve Bow, which already gives you a 46.9% HP boost, so you don't want to overflow. In this case, you always want to go ER Sands in terms of sustainability and crit circlet. And if you are lacking HP substats still, you can swap out the circlet for HP circlet instead. For substats, her main priority is HP, and then crit rate, and then crit damage, and finally energy recharge. And of course, if you want to build elemental mastery, stuff like that on her, it can go after that. Moving on to the problem with her energy recharge. How much energy recharge is enough for YELAN? First of all, my definition of enough is how much is enough for her to cycle smoothly. It is going to be highly dependent. It is going to be highly dependent upon a few things. The first one is, are you wearing a sacrificial warbow or Favonius? Are you wearing a sacrificial bow or Favonius warbow? Because those two can lower the requirement by quite a bit. The second one is, do you have C1? Because C1 allows double cast of E, which helps with her problem, energy recharge problem quite a bit. And the third one is YELAN the only Hydro on the team? So if your answer is no for all three of them, which means you're using YELAN as the only Hydro on the team at C0 with no energy recharge weapon, then you're looking at around 210 to be ideal. However, if your requirement, if you do have the Favonius warbow equipped or sacrificial bow equipped, the amount drops by 30% immediately, so you're only looking at 180, which is still quite high. But the best is if you have another Hydro on the team, especially Xingqiu, or if you have Raiden Shogun on the team, because Raiden also does energy recharge for everyone, then the requirement drops to 160%. And of course, if you got both, the requirement drops to as low as 130%. Currently, I run YELAN with around 160% energy recharge, and I run her with Shogun, so she works quite nice there. But if you do not have Shogun, if you do not have Shogun or Xingqiu funneling the particles into her, her energy recharge problem will become apparent after a few cycles. Finally, to end it off, a few team recommendations for YELAN. I will recommend, I think, 4 teams in this case, around 4 at least. So for YELAN, slots into a lot of teams, basically any team that Xingqiu slots into other than the team with C1 Hu Tao inside it, YELAN can basically work. Also, for some teams, she works better than others. So with that said, here's a few teams I would recommend. The first one is the any Pyro DPS team. So in this team, you're looking at any Pyro DPS. Yanfei, Diluc, yoimiya, or Hu Tao all work here. And of course, zhongli for shielding, YELAN for sub DPS, and Bennett for damage boost. This one, the main problem with this one is that YELAN is going to run out of energy particle after around 2 cycles. If you cannot finish the enemy in 2 cycles, the time it needed to finish enemies will drastically get longer, because you're losing the vaporize side of the Hydro side of vaporize. So there's the better option for this team, which is the double Hydro version of this team. So any Pyro DPS again, zhongli, YELAN, and finally Xingqiu. For this one, YELAN's problem can be easily solved by having Xingqiu finishing off with an E. So you can either go EQE or QEE, it doesn't matter how you do it, just finish off with an E, but swap Xingqiu out as soon as YELAN is ready to receive the particle. So essentially funnel half of Xingqiu's particle onto YELAN to help with YELAN's problem. As for Xingqiu, because he has a sacrificial sword, so he's gonna be good. His energy is not gonna be much of a problem. So for this team, you're essentially using Xingqiu as a battery for YELAN, but other than that, you do lose a bit of damage because Bennett's no longer attacking, but Xingqiu sort of makes up for that, so this is like the better version of the Hydro team. Moving on to the classic Taser team, so Sucrose for damage boost, Kokomi for healing, and if you want to go old school, Child works here as well, YELAN sub DPS, and the old build requires Fischl here, but I would actually recommend Raiden, because Raiden is more recommended because Kokomi and YELAN are both problem child when it comes to energy generation. So having Raiden here is actually much better than Fischl, but if you don't, Fischl works well as a battery. Fischl has been an electro battery for quite a while, so if you stack a bit more energy recharge on YELAN and Kokomi, it works too. And finally, the Raiden national team, where YELAN slots in now. So instead of Raiden, Xingqiu, Bennett, and Shanling, you have Raiden, YELAN, Shanling, and Bennett. So the only problem for this team, as I've mentioned before, is you need to swap a little bit, because originally what you want to do is Bennett EQ and then Shanling EQ or Xingqiu EQ, and then you do everyone's EQ first and you end up with finish up with Raiden. But in this case, you want to go YELAN before Bennett, so everyone can get the maximum amount of damage boost. So in this case, you want to go YELAN's Q into Bennett's Q into Shanling's Q and Raiden's Q in that exact order for maximum damage. And finally, for any Hydro mains out there, YELAN also works in mono Hydro teams, but again, not an expert in that field. The only one I would recommend is something like Ayato as main DPS, YELAN Xingqiu, and then Kazuha for damage boost. So to conclude, whether to pull for YELAN or not, if you want to replace Xingqiu, just because you don't like Xingqiu, I honestly wouldn't recommend YELAN, because Xingqiu in that case doesn't make too much of a difference between the two. But if you're looking for the second Xingqiu, or you're looking for YELAN to play together with Xingqiu, like the double Hydro teams, then I would actually recommend YELAN. She is a great character, her damage is insane. So that's all I have for this video. If you like the content, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. Thank you and have a nice day.